In the case of Russia and Ukraine, you could have a rational argument about how it ought to end, but I think there's no certainty in the end about how it will end. And the same is true of the war in Gaza. Even historians who've spent all their lives working on the war, as I have, you hesitate to predict what's going to happen in the next year.
Yeah, because each case is different, but the underlying sociological mechanisms of having pro-war and pro-peace factions, having people who argue that it is better to give up and work with what we can get, and the others who say, like, no, we continue. And in the Japanese case, I mean, the military said yes. 100 million martyrs. That was their motto. Because Japan only had 60 million, but they included the 40 million for Korea. They wanted to, they wanted to guerrilla warfare. They said, like, let them come and then we'll fight them in the bushes. And that would, of course, have been an incredible bloodletting. And it is a huge success of the peace faction to win over them and say, like, shut up, guys, just shut up. And we're going to give up. We are not going to sacrifice 100 million people.
Yeah, so that was propaganda. I mean, I think that the war minister too actually really understood, in fact, the nature of the problem. By the summer of 1945, Japan was running out of weapons, running out of munitions, running out of, of explosives. It had already run out of ships. It was running out of aircraft. What could you do? And I think that had the Americans had to invade, I think the battle would have been much less disastrous than the predictions suggested at the time. Japan would have been defeated and Honshu and Kyushu occupied. But that's, we don't know. That's a what if. I mean, in the case of Ukraine, yes. I mean, the peace party, war party, they're committed to trying to retain their sovereignty and to reject the fruits of Russian aggression for Putin, with strong backing, but perhaps not strong enough. Will there come a point where a majority in the political and military elite say enough is enough? I thought that might come last year. In fact, it didn't. Enough is enough. Our losses are too high. We have no prospect of expelling Russia from the territories that Russia has occupied, so we have to try and live with reality. That may still happen this year, but for an historian, we know so little about what's actually going on in the corridors of power in Kiev or in Moscow. There are lots of very good suppositions and suggestions, but we're going to have to wait 100 years until these archives are open and we can really understand that process.
And then and that's the frustrating thing, like we have to wait for a long time until we get it right. But we have at least we have the benefit of actually understanding the Second World War and understanding the process of surrender in Japan correctly. Yeah. What would you say was the process to ending this and to getting to the Missouri, like where the Japanese then officially signed the instrument of surrender? Internally, what was most important? Was it the authority of the Tenno? Was it the military realizing that they don't want the Japan to be Bolshevized? What was it that allowed for this process to continue, that you needed in terms of in the political system or the sociological system to have that unity to move to surrender?
Well, I think certainly the military, like Emperor, doubted the capacity of Japan's population to carry on, and certainly they weren't going to become armed militia standing on the beaches, trying to kill their one American. And I think that much of the army leadership recognized that, and that was true, of course, in the empire when the emperor sent out all the delegates to the various parts of the empire to say, we have surrendered, so stop fighting, and they did. And I think that that must have played a very important part. I think the second part is, of course, they never said they were surrendering. And never talked about surrender, as you know. They talked about terminating the war. They talked indeed about the benevolence of the emperor in bringing the war to the end and saving lives on all sides and so on. In other words, a complete inversion of the reality. And that was already in the Japanese media before the Americans arrived, a week, 10 days later. And that was already the story for the Japanese to help them cope with the fact of what was basically surrender.
This is a very important point to make. You need a surrender narrative. You need a narrative that makes surrender palpable
yeah.
to your own population, right? To say that no, this is the best course of action, and it is a sovereign decision to do so. And just one anecdote. I have a Japanese teacher, and his father turned 100 this year. He was 16, 17 in 45. Or 18, and when the surrender came, he was stationed in a military base in Honshu, not too far from Tokyo. And when the surrender was broadcasted, it was August 15, August 16?
15, yeah, 12 o'clock.
August 15. Yeah. That was the moment when it ended for them, and they thought it is over. But because the instrument of surrender wasn't signed until September 2nd, the Allied forces actually didn't stop the bombings yet. They continued for 2 weeks, and his base was destroyed, and he was saved only because he ran an errand outside of the base. But for the people, the Japanese who were on the ground, they thought the end is the 15th of August. So in a sense, they believed it. They really believed, okay, this is it. It's over.
Yeah. Well, no, the bombing didn't carry on after it carried on. I think the last raid was on the night of the 14th, 15th, I think.
On the city, but there were still military targets that were being attacked.
Were there? Yeah. I wish I didn't know that. And I should have done, obviously.
We can communicate about this separately. Yeah. His story is that the base was destroyed between August 15 and September 2nd on the mainland. But in any case, the point is that the Japanese really, once it was broadcast to them, it was over. It was over.
No, for them it was over. But there is this curious hiatus between that broadcast and the laying down of arms and so on, and the arrival of the Americans. The Americans, I mean, they've been preparing for this for some time and so on, and I'm quite surprised that more effort was not made to arrive on the Japanese home islands a bit sooner, because all kinds of things happened. There were movements in among the armed forces saying, we're not going to surrender, we're not accepting it, the emperor's lying, etc., and they had to be dissuaded and disarmed and so on. There were threats that, when the Americans landed by plane, kamikazes would come and destroy the planes as they arrived, etc., and all of this, and as I said, a media program which emphasized the whole time that the war had come to an end because of the kindness of the emperor, not that the war had come to an end because we couldn't win it. The Allies said, stop. And I think for many Japanese that remained the narrative even after the act of surrender had been signed on September the 2nd by the foreign minister, not by the emperor. That's still the story that somehow or other, the war came to an end. Not that Japan lost, but Japan decided that it wasn't worth the sacrifices for everybody to carry on, and that proved for Japan, after the actual surrender, a very useful psychological approach, I think, to the end of the war. It allowed them to begin the process of rebuilding very quickly, and B, it allowed them, of course, to see the Americans not as a barbarous enemy any longer, but as a potential ally.
A good narrative, a good story really goes a long way, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. No, I think, in this case, it's completely matched Japanese culture, because they were not going to say, oh dear, we surrendered.
大家好，我是主播周玉琴。很多的朋友告诉我们，太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌帮助了睡眠品质。现在呢，进一步推出晚安加强版，添加了首创最适合台湾人体质的天然 GABA、色氨酸、茶氨酸、香蜂草4大天然草本助眠配方。强化睡眠全期都起到放松舒眠的效果。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它本身就含有台大专利授权克菲尔乳杆菌 M1 等8种专利菌，首创益生菌、益生元、后生元黄金3角配方， 帮助维持消化道的机能。有季节敏感、代谢困扰、关心异常细胞风险的好朋友呢，可以选择原版的太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它添加有超级食物羽衣甘蓝，健康再加分。而有睡眠困扰的朋友们，赶快选择蓝色包装这一款晚安加强版，绝对是更有感。选择太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，做好日常保养，实现睡眠自由，身体轻松无负担。每日克菲尔，时刻美好 ，Good Feel Good， 请上快点购为健康下单，而且要记得输入推荐代码，有额外的折扣优惠。